Hey guys, this is Justin. Welcome to another video. So I'm making this specifically because I've not felt any desire really or any reason to talk about Star Wars, but I do want to check in. However, if you haven't seen it, we've been releasing lots of really great non-Star Wars content on the channel. I know YouTube often won't show topics if they're outside your ordinary interest, but I'll say, for example, I just put out, I think, a great video on the road a couple of days ago. Last week, we did one on The Last Starfighter and Tron, and tonight, I'm finally going to be putting the poll up for the next book in the Eckhart's Ladder book club. So, join the Patreon. You can do so for under a couple bucks, and you'll get voting right. All right, so I think I would have titled this video something like The Truth About Star Wars Grifting, because it's something that quite surprisingly to me, I found myself being accused of. People say, Eck, you're a grifter. Eck, stop grifting Star Wars for clicks. And for those who don't know, a grifter is someone who is purposefully negative or inflammatory in order to drum up attention, and it was, for a time, a viable way to make money when it comes to Star Wars topics. I've never considered myself a grifter in the slightest, though of course I've made negative videos about things I don't like. I think the differentiation is grifters specifically go out of their way to make negative content knowing that it drives clicks, whereas I think the vast majority of us simply have really strong opinions. Yes, I've made a lot of money talking about how much I hate the Battle of Exegol, but the amount of videos I make is, I think, proportional to the degree in which I hate it. On the other hand, I've also made even more videos and even more money talking about, for example, how hyperspace works in Star Wars, or how much I loved Andor or The Mandalorian Season 1 and 2. And that, I think, is the difference between a grifter and a genuine reviewer, with grifters really going negative when they don't have anything else, going negative when they need money. I like to believe that I give everything a fair shot. Some things I like, some things I don't. It is what it is. So I'll talk for a second why these allegations have come up, but first I want to talk about the modern state of Star Wars. And I'm also not going to go through all of your favorite YouTubers or Star Wars personalities and decide whether they're grifters or not. Here's the thing, for me personally, I think everyone who starts, at least most people who start, generally come to content creation with the best intentions. I think sometimes, and this has definitely happened for me too, fan backlash or bad experiences with certain communities or fandoms can actually push you further in one direction. For example, and this is just made up, if I put out a video saying I didn't like the new Horizon video game and Horizon fans came at me, very harshly, that would, I think, color my view of the fandom and thus perhaps the series, and that is sort of a perpetuating cycle, especially as you become a larger content creator. Part of the reason why I try to give everyone a little bit of grace, and also why I try to mind my own business. Anyway, the funny thing is, it's no longer economically feasible to be a Star Wars grifter. And this is gonna sound like someone who just hates Star Wars saying this, but right now anyway, not enough people care about the franchise to suckle on the teat of hate videos. I mean, look at your favorite Star Wars YouTubers. Listen, do you think it's easier to read a Cormac McCarthy book and do a video on the road than it is to spattle off about some Star Wars lore or some modern Star Wars story? No. It is more satisfying, I will say personally, but the thing is, it's just no one cares right now, and that's fine. But I do think it's important to know, when The Last Jedi came out or when the sequel trilogy was releasing, that wasn't the case. There were people who could make a real living hating Star Wars and even blindly hating it. It's not the case anymore. So I got this opinion directly because I came out quite critically against two things over the past couple of days. One was Star Wars comics. I've been over that discussion before on the channel. Star Wars comics almost always used traced fan art. They're very lazily done in my opinion, and they're generally not worth reading. The most recent Kylo Ren comic, which has been releasing, sort of solidified that opinion for me. The other thing that I came out against was a type of book which Star Wars canon has been releasing, and specifically the new Star Wars Legacy novel. So Star Wars Legacy was announced a couple of days ago at New York Comic Con. It supposedly follows Leia training Rey between episodes 8 and 9, showing how she repaired the Skywalker lightsaber. I am not excited excited for this book, and it's got nothing to do with me not liking Rey or Leia. I actually like all of the characters in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. I do like Rey, despite the fact that the movies themselves have some serious issues. I thought the characters were all very compelling, very charismatic, and I'm excited to see what they do with them next. This specific novel, however, has all the trappings of the many mid-tier or low-tier Star Wars canon novels they've been pumping out, and which are ultimately extremely forgettable. So I tweeted with my Kevin Smith picture, "Dude, who cares?" And admittedly, yes, that is not the nicest thing to tweet because people do care, but also it's a Star Wars book. It's not that serious. We also need to be real. It's not going to be a high piece of literature, and that's okay. Why I don't care about this specifically is, as I mentioned, this falls in the trap that many Star Wars canon novels have, where one, it's clearly set simply because there's a space of time where the character has nothing which has defined their story yet. However, we know what Rey is like in episode 9. We know what Leia is like in episode 9. We also know what they're like in episode 8. There's very little that can happen to the characters which will be consequential in any way. This is the same thing that happened arguably with books like Resistance Reborn and many others I'll get to in just a second. So we know where they start, we know where they end, we know they can't change very much. Also, these books cannot have major implications because these characters are about to be handled in major stories. There's going to be a Rey movie, and the books and the movies do not work together whatsoever, and the books are scared to do anything the movies will overwrite later. So they tell very, very limited self-contained storylines, and often they focus on one specific plot detail, which they can explain, as Star Wars famously does. In this case, the repair of the Skywalker saber, the Youngling Slayer. I said this specifically. There are many good canon novels, and I'll talk about some of my favorite towards the end of this video, but the fill-in-the-blank novels featuring main characters have almost always been extremely limited and extremely boring. The larger problem is that Star Wars novels right now are not in a position where, unless they move to a completely different era, they can tell any real story, because there's always the looming threat of a film or a video game overwriting what the novel says and making things more difficult. So clearly, only very limited stories are carved out, and generally the characters enter and leave sort of in the same way. And I'm not just making this up. I have read every single main Star Wars canon novel because it's my job. I do it not only for the YouTube channel, but also for my book club podcast, Tap Cav Transmissions. And this book feels a lot like Jedi Battlestars, maybe the worst Star Wars book I've ever read. Certainly one of them, set between the two Jedi games and where the characters have very little room for anything to actually happen. It reminds me of Resistance Reborn, or Heir to the Jedi, or Star Wars Brotherhood. I mean, most of these aren't outright terrible novels, but I really struggle to tell you anything that happened. They're not memorable. They ultimately are more, it feels like, chances to make extra money off popular pre-existing time periods than anything else. Not to say Legends didn't do the same thing as well. I haven't even mentioned the Expanded Universe for that reason, but Star Wars Legends also had stories which were told to progress a narrative. You had big, long events, you had characters, rather than these brief flash and pan moments, which don't do a whole lot. And it would be one thing if they did give you a whole lot of insight into new characters, but they can't even do that because there will be later books or later video games or later movies or shows, most importantly, which will do that instead. Another really good example of this was the recent Acolyte prequel, which was really terrible. But not all Star Wars canon novels are like this. The Alphabet Squadron trilogy and Lost Stars specifically are two of my favorite Star Wars books. Obviously, the trilogy is 3 books of all time. Lost Stars is an S-tier novel. Alphabet Squadron 3, to me, is an S-tier novel. I literally have it rated like that in my book club podcast. What's the difference? Well, they largely make up characters. They have characters which can go through massive changes we don't already know, and they're able to carve out their own real story. Something this upcoming Rey book, Star Wars Legacy, is not going to be able to do. Anyway, sort of some mixed thoughts there. There it is. See you guys next time. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you agree, disagree. Let me know if you do think, am I a shill or am I a grifter? I've been accused of both within the same day or week on a frequent basis, really since people started using those words. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.